guys, and welcome to our Focus 2019 video, just at the very end of the year, very end of the decade, which still sort of blows my mind. So I just wanted to take you through the mediums that I focused on this year. I do see a lot of people posting videos about their favorite and least favorite art supplies of the year, but this isn't really that. This is just me showing you the pieces that I've completed this year, the mediums I used to complete them, and basically why I chose the mediums that I did. This actually does change year on year depending on what I'm sort of obsessed with at the time. I have a very bad attention span and I flit through various media basically week to week, month to month, year to year. So this year we'll be focusing on just those art supplies that I have used predominantly. Okay, so we'll start with water paint. Probably the sort of easiest and cleanest of the paint media, and I think I've used this medium every year since I actually first took up water paint. Now, the beauty about it is just how portable it is and how easy it is to create these tiny little palettes that you could just slip in your bag and take with you. And I've already put together a video about my travel kit, which I will link to. Now, even though it's a great medium for sketching, I actually take it quite seriously. For me, if I am working on water paint pieces, they're usually quite detailed and quite time consuming. So at least for me, it's not so much a sketching or practice medium as it's quite serious. And I can give you basically some examples of what I've been working on this year. So my best accomplishments are these sort of native Australian series. I've got a few of them here, not all of them, but this is one and this is another one. But then I don't really focus on just one series at a time, so I usually have multiple paintings going on at once. This was one of those, and I tend to take quite a long time to finish a particular piece. So even though this was finished this year, I started this probably about a year and a half ago. It's just because I have a really bad attention span and I'm constantly moving from one medium to the other. So as you can see, my paper tends to be pretty consistent. My favorite paper is this Fabriano Artistico 200 GSM. This is the thinner paper, which I actually prefer over the thicker paper, and I've got an example of that here. This is the 300 GSM version, and I just don't find it to be as smooth. I don't know if you can sort of make out the texture of the paper, but I find this to be much thinner. And since I tend to work in quite dry layers, there isn't a lot of washes, the paper doesn't actually buckle too badly, so I'm pretty okay with using this thinner paper. And my favorite water paint brushes are a mix of the Raphael and the Da Vinci sable brushes. So I find that these hold their point the best, though I have a sort of big collection of water paint brushes. I'll give you a bit of a quick look. But if I'm working on something that needs quite a bit of detail, I'm usually coming back to these. Now, with regards to the actual paint itself, I tend to use a bit of a variety, and I empty them out in my studio palette, which is this Holbein metal palette, and this sits at on my desk every day, and I can just open it whenever I need it. It's a bit of a mess, but this is how I like it. I generally don't use colors purely from the tube. I tend to mix a lot, and so all these little hues here are quite invaluable. And yep, so if I have a paint of choice, regardless of the brand, I tend to go by pigment. I will just empty it out and then use it as I see fit. And I don't think I'll ever see myself working with a more limited palette. I really like my collection and I like mixing my colors, and you know, that works for me. I think it can be confusing for a beginner to have this much paint on their palette, but as you get better and as you learn more about your pigments, you know, why not? Okay, so our next medium of 2019 is oils. I started painting with oils back in 2016, but in a very limited capacity, so I think the messy setup put me off a bit. But recently, perhaps from about last year and especially this year, I focused pretty significantly on oils, and I think I almost felt a bit justified in doing that because this year I sold quite a few of my oil pieces, and there's really nothing like knowing that somebody likes your work enough to put on their wall to really give you a boost and energize you to continue working with a medium such as this. Now, my favorite oils are quite a mix, as you probably know about me now. I'm not really brand loyal. I generally go by pigment rather than brand. So the workhorses are these. I generally prefer the open stock Jackson's paints, which are quite soft, and I add specialty pigments like, you know, Naples yellow hues and Indian yellows as I see fit. And I do also have some fancy brands, as I think some people would call them. These are sort of more luxury brands, not so much the Sennelier, but the Michael Harding, Williamsburg, Old Holland, and the Schmincke Mussinis, and these are brilliant for glazing. Now, based on what I'm actually planning on doing, I will choose my palette. So a piece such as this, where I was going to play around with a palette knife, I am going to opt for a thicker paint that will, you know, actually be worth putting on in such a manner. So I probably wouldn't be using these guys on a piece like this. But they are brilliant for thinner work such as this, where there's just quite a few layers and it's just lightly glazed, so the beauty of the pigment comes through. Now, in terms of support, I use a variety. I really like paper, so you can see this is Fabriano, and I would have primed this paper before painting on it, and a lot of the time it's offcuts. So if I am doing a watercolor piece and it fails miserably, I tend to prime it and then just use it for water paint. There's also canvas, stretch canvases such as this, wood panels, which I really love because of the smoothness, and again, paper. It takes some time to actually get your paper primed. So this is paper and this is canvas paper. If you don't actually want to take the time to prime your paper before you start working, just get yourself some canvas paper, which looks like this. You can see the texture and it's already primed, it's ready to go, and you just slap on the paint. So this was pretty good for me this year, because sometimes I'd have paper all over the studio drying, paper that's been primed, and I'd want to make a quick sketch, so paper like this would come in handy. In terms of brushes, my favorite brushes this year were these Jackson's Procryl, but I did order a bunch of Rosemary & Co brushes, which I hope to use next year. In terms of a mixing palette, it's simply a glass frame. So I took it apart. This was the back of the frame. This is the front of the frame, and I just taped it together. And honestly, it's sturdy enough. And it hasn't given me any issues. It's thick enough glass. I don't think it's going to break very easily. And something else I did this year that was actually quite interesting. I rocked up to my local hardware store, bought myself some MDF board, cut it down to size, primed it, and I'm using this as support. So this is much cheaper option than buying, say, already framed wood panels, especially if you want these smaller sizes. So this is definitely something you can think about doing. Okay, so our next medium of 2019 is gouache. And though I've owned gouache paint for years, I predominantly use them as highlights or just as assistant paints to my watercolors. It's only this year that I started using them as a vehicle to complement my oils. They're less finicky than oils, and they're a lot less stressful than water paint, so they're that perfect sort of medium. And I found that by practicing my landscapes with gouache, I was actually really improving when it came to my oils as well. Now, I predominantly use these in my sketchbooks because for me it's still a practice medium. It's basically assisting me with my oils. That's how I view it at this stage. And why I like it is that I really don't have to worry about what brushes I'm using. I don't have to worry about what paper I'm using. It's a really forgiving medium. As you can see here, I have used it in my Strathmore Mixed Media sketchbook, which I've spoken about before. It alternates smooth and more textured paper, and so I've tried the medium on both sides, and I try to move beyond landscapes. I'll give you an example here. You may know that I'm trying to work on my values recently, just to catch up on, you know, all the basic art lessons that I've missed. And so I've been trying to use gouache in a more comprehensive way. I've got a little chickadee. Is this a chickadee? I think it's a chickadee. Or is it a blue tit? Yeah, I'm Australian. I'm not too knowledgeable about my European birds. So I've got an example here and some more landscapes here, which I think you may have seen in another video. And some more birds. Okay, so my most used gouache brand would probably be Winsor & Newton. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this brand. It's the most easily accessible. And I honestly, I don't think you need to go for anything else. If you like these, I say stick with them. They're brilliant. I did buy some Sennelier gouache while I was in France this year, and I have actually demoed them. The video isn't up yet, but it will be, and then you can basically watch that and see what my views are. And then you've got the Della Rowney designer gouache, which I think is also pretty reasonable. I think with gouache, as with most other paints, just pay attention to what pigment you're using, especially when it comes to permanence. Now, because these are staying in my sketchbook for the most part, I'm not too worried about it. But if I was to create a piece that I wanted to sell, I would have to be quite stringent about which of the pigments I'm going to be choosing to use. Now, the brushes are a mixture, but for the most part they're soft synthetics, so I find these to work the best with gouache, and I am really happy with these ProArt Proline brushes. Yeah, so I've got a few, and then the connoisseur brushes as well. These are pretty good. Okay, so our next medium of 2019 is actually more of an honorable mention. I didn't use this sufficiently enough to say that this was my mediums of choice, but I do plan on using it quite frequently next year for my value studies. This of course happened after I had that epiphany where I realized that I had quite a few holes in my art knowledge. So expect to see quite a few charcoal drawings in my future. Now, I've already posted a video where I drew a dog using charcoal, just to give you some tips and tricks to the medium. It can be quite messy, but it's quite rewarding as well. Now, I'm still testing out the different sketchbooks and paper that I have and which is best for the medium. I found that this Alpha Series Stillman and Burn is actually a bit too textured, but this same, well, it's a Stillman and Burn, but it's Cillian series, it's actually quite perfect. And I am quite happy with the progress so far, and I do intend on taking you through my journey with me to see how I improve. So thank you for watching, thank you for supporting the channel, and if you do have any questions either about the materials or about the artworks, just leave me a comment in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you are interested in seeing more behind the scenes pictures and videos, please head on over to our Instagram page. I do post quite a few pictures there. And that's it for now. Wishing you a great 2020 going forwards, and we appreciate your support, and we'll hopefully have another video out soon. Thank you.